Good evening or afternoon or even morning, depending on where you are. I am Bill Watson-Canning, and welcome to our webinar on how COVID has changed college admissions. I was talking to a friend a couple of days ago. We both sort of agreed we actually miss business travel at this point. It's been a while. Normally this time of year, we'd be traveling around and talking to groups of people live, and looking forward to getting back to that at some point. But also looking forward to keeping this because we're able to get people today from around the country, and even I think a couple of you might be from Asia there, which go back to bed. We're doing a webinar for your time zone on Saturday. Please know that we're going to go ahead and record this webinar. So I know it's dinner hour and dogs bark in the background and distract you and what have you. Please also feel free to use the Q&A box. These webinars work best when we have your questions. Certainly happy to share information with you, but really the most interesting thing are always the questions you ask. In terms of who I am, that's me right there. You can see there I went to Princeton. All that means is several decades ago, I convinced some people to let me go to a campus for 4 years. Of more relevance tonight, in my role at University Consultants of America, we've helped well over 1,000, don't have the exact number yet, students sort of achieve their college goals over the past several years. And one thing that happens is we help, just as a company, we help so many people. We're able to spot trends in the data. While each individual case is, of course, unique and special, just like your mom told you, it's important for us to also be able to take that bird's eye view. And I don't think it's a surprise to anyone that the admission year that just concluded is the most unusual one of all time. I know I spent a lot of the past year telling people that I never lived through this before either. So we didn't entirely know what to expect, although we had some good educated guesses, I think most of which came true, but we sort of want to share what we've seen. Also going to talk though about what the class of 2022 and the class of 2023 can expect. That would be the students who are right now finishing up 11th grade and will be applying to school in the fall. Since of course the pandemic affected all of your lives for the past year, your 11th grade was a little different than every other 11th grade that's gone through. And then 10th graders, or even if we have some younger students on here, we expect things will be back to normal, whatever that means. But what can you expect as, we already know that there are some changes that are going to stick around. And as I say, definitely want the Q&A. But the first thing I want to talk about is how colleges actually evaluate students. Because without understanding that, all the other strategies aren't necessarily going to make a lot of sense. Now we have some of our existing students on here. You've heard this before. It's all right. You can hear it again. And if you're not an existing student, consider this a crash course in how admissions offices work. Broadly speaking, there are certainly schools that are what we think of as numbers based. They look at grades, they look at test scores, and that's basically it. If they set some sort of threshold, 30 on the ACT, if you're above it, you're in, if you're below it, you're out. As long as your GPA is in line with that. Those tend to be your larger public universities. That is because those are responsible directly to the taxpayers, and as taxpayers, we don't like colleges just to say, oh, we're making it up as we go. But what your private universities do, and even many of your publics do, is they use something called the holistic admissions process. And so we use a little school in Cambridge, Massachusetts called Harvard as an example. Most of you have heard of it, I'm guessing. But this form that we have up on the screen, I'm not sure how big it is, I'm going to zoom in a second anyway, is similar to the forms that you will find at pretty much any admissions office, which is to say that they are really grading students along 3 areas. They might use a different scale, they might have different terms, doesn't really matter, it's 3 areas that matter to them. The first are academics. I hope I am not breaking any news when I tell you that these are educational institutions. They care about how you're going to do in the classroom. Can you handle the work? They will look at your GPA. They will look at your test scores under normal circumstances. They want to see if you can do the work. The second thing that they will look at, and there are about 6 different words that they have for it here: extracurriculars, athletics, community, et cetera, et cetera. Basically, what do you do when you are not being told that you must sit in the classroom for 6 hours every day, 6.5 hours every day at high school? You have a choice of what to do with your time after 3:30 p.m. on the weekends during the summers. How have you used it? It looks like the Olympics are going to be happening this summer. Trust me, every year there's an Olympics. There are 16, 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds who participate in the Olympics. Those people have achieved quite a bit extracurricularly. They've shown a dedication to doing something that they actually care about, which is going to translate to perhaps applying themselves with dedication elsewhere. And it's not just athletics. I mean, it can, if you're a musician, if you are an aspiring journalist, whatever it is that you are, how deeply do you go into it? How much originality do you show? Now, not everybody's an Olympian, as I said. There are a few of those every year. It is who you're in competition with. But within the arena in which you compete, what is it that you are doing? So academics, extracurriculars, and then we get to the third area. The third area is a little bit trickier to identify. Harvard calls it personal qualities. I know some schools call it character. At UCA, we think of this as the human side of the student. What kind of person are you? Are you the kind of person who actually is going to contribute to the life of the campus? Because these campuses are reopening fully pretty soon, and you're going to be on them 24/7. And you're only going to be in class about 12 to 15 hours a week. So when you're in class, go ahead, take. The professor is there to give you. But when you are outside of class, how is it that you are actually contributing to the life of the campus? Are you the kind of person who's going to be helping your peers, in whatever way that is? Are you the kind of person who's going to sit by yourself in the dining hall and stay in the library all the time and never talk to anybody? Now, we can talk a little bit about how you communicate that, but essentially what it comes down to is there are a lot of areas on your college applications that will have nothing to do with your achievements. There are places on your application that are entirely about achievement. Of course, transcripts, test scores, extracurricular resume, honors that you've won, awards. But when you get into the other parts of that application, your teacher recommendation letters, if you do an interview at schools that interview, essays, you want to be showing something about who you are as a person, because frankly, certainly if you're shooting for a school like this little one up in Cambridge, Massachusetts, the students who are going to succeed at those schools really have to be scoring highly in all 3 of those areas. The greatest personal appeal in the world is not going to help you if you've failed your junior year 3 times. But on the flip side, there is a reason people with perfect test scores don't achieve these schools oftentimes, and it has to do with not seeming like the kind of person who's going to actually lift people up. All right, but I think you're aware, you've been on the planet just like I have for the past, 14, 15, 8, I don't know, however many months. Things got a little disrupted starting in March of last year, or earlier if you were over in Asia. And so what happened? Well, it got a little harder to measure some of these areas. For the class that just went by, meaning the 12th graders who are graduating, who have at this point actually committed in most cases to where they're headed next year, it was we saw a lot of test optional schools last year, and that's actually carrying forward this year as well. But literally for months at a time last year, it was impossible to take the SAT or ACT. Test centers were closed. They were not exactly in a rush to get a bunch of people in a room together, breathing on each other as they fill things out with the number 2 pencils. So a lot of schools went test optional. Now, test optional is actually not new to the pandemic. There are universities that have been test optional. There were universities that were test optional back when I was applying to school. We've seen this for years. Test optional has always been the kind of thing that can work if you are somebody whose test score does not match your GPA, which does happen. You'll see sort of a student who has severe test anxiety and an exceptional GPA, but just can't really handle the test. In that case, test optional works. But in most cases, the test and your GPA are not that far out of line. So test optional has never been sort of a freebie. One thing that we saw is that the rich got richer because of that test optional stuff. Suddenly everybody thought they had a chance at getting into the Ivy League schools because the Ivy Leagues weren't going to look at tests. Well, first of all, that's not true. If you had a test score and reported it, they were certainly going to look at it. Test optional never meant test blind. If you were going in there with a 1580 SAT and you didn't put it on your application, you were making a grievous error. What we saw happen at most of, I hate the rankings, but call it your top 15 to 20 schools, is those schools saw their application numbers spike, but they didn't really have more spots to offer. You got this sort of flood of extra applicants, but they only have so many dorm rooms that they're planning on putting people in. And so you saw record lows at most of those schools. And in fact, one thing that seems to be the case with test optional is to talk to deans at universities, you'll hear about half of the students wound up reporting a test last year. We're kind of still waiting for some of the data to see if the average scores were a little lower because students didn't have as many cracks at it. But by and large, when you were talking about the Ivies or your Stanfords, MITs, Georgetowns, I'm going to leave the school off, and so I won't go too far, but kind of those schools that we think of as the top tier. I think the number that we're hearing is about 60 to 70% of students who got in actually had a test score. So about half of applicants had a test score, but of the ones they admitted, more of them tended to report their test scores because a good test score is still an asset. Now, when you move down a tier, in terms of name recognition anyway, the schools that maybe didn't see quite the same spike in applicants, in those cases, actually sometimes those numbers went the other way, where again, about half the students did not report a test, half did not. But a larger portion of the admitted class did not report tests. And we have theories about why that is. Sometimes schools might actually think they have a shot at you if they don't know how good your test score is. All sorts of strategies to talk about there. But by and large, definitely a rich got richer. It was true for technology during the pandemic. It was certainly true for the big name schools. Now, I said that these schools didn't have more beds to offer. Actually, they had fewer. This was the perversity of the past year. In a lot of cases, there were fewer spots to offer. Because guess what happened to the class of 2020 from high school? The class that was hoping to start their freshman year in the fall of 2020. A lot of those people were living through the pandemic too. In fact, all of them were. And a lot of them didn't really like the idea of attending class this way for their first year. And there's always been an option at most schools to take a gap year, or many schools, to take a gap year between high school and your first year. In other words, you're admitted and you decide to take a gap year. To nobody's surprise, many more students than normal took gap years last year. I'm sure that this is not readable depending on your screen. I imagine some people are on phones. But Harvard itself was about 3 to 4 times as many students took gap years. And guess what? They're all coming back in the fall of 2021. And those beds were kind of already committed. So a little bit of a crunch there. And then the last thing we saw was much more use of the wait list than we've seen in the past. Wait lists have always been around. Schools use wait lists because if they're hoping for 2,000 people in their incoming freshman class, it's awfully hard to manage that exactly. So you admit enough students to, I don't know, you hope that you come in somewhere between 1,900 and 2,000 students, and then you admit off the wait list to hit your number, whatever that might be. Normally, talk to deans of admissions in the past who will tell you that they can predict, almost down to the decimal point, what their yield will be among different groups of students. That stuff's gotten a lot less predictable all of a sudden, both because, well, for any number of reasons. Some people's priorities have changed. People are less apt to want to travel far from home in certain cases, especially with the uncertainty about what school might even look like. Since remember, a lot of people were applying to schools before we even knew what the vaccines rollout was going to be like. So across the board, still crunching the numbers, but 3 or 4 times as many students on wait lists as we've seen in the past. And the other thing that's sort of buried in here is that the public universities also saw a big spike in applicants. A lot of people who might have gone out of state in the past chose to stay in state, which meant that for people applying from out of state, there might not have been as many spots. So there's a lot of sort of crazy stuff with the numbers there. And that's the year gone by, but let's talk about, and you can certainly talk about those results, but let's talk about the year that's coming. Those of you who are in 11th grade, who are approaching your finals right now, I imagine in most cases, although I just talked to a student today who'd already taken hers. First of all, test optional is still around. Again, test optional has always been around, but many schools have continued to carry test optional forward into this year. Now, for our international students, they have still been contending with a lot of canceled test dates. Looks like that's starting to normalize a little bit. So I certainly know our international students have oftentimes been in situations where they can't get a test. For our domestic students, those of you in the United States, you have the opportunity to take the test. I would tell you right now, plan to take the test. Yes, a lot of schools have extended the test optional stuff, but if you have the ability to take the test right now, you will be in better shape if you have a test score to report. Now, if you get to the fall and you're applying to school and for various reasons you don't want to report your test score, that can become part of your strategy. Again, as I mentioned earlier, test optional has never meant test blind. If you have a good score to report, they will want to see it. That's even true at the University of California schools right now. I know there's a lawsuit where they're saying they have to not look at it, and the admissions offices are fighting it because they want every piece of data they can hold on to. Remember, they're trying to look at academics, extracurriculars, and personal qualities, and they want those data points to make to have as they make their judgments about academics. But there have been some other changes. Recently, the College Board killed the subject test in the SAT essay. For our 11th graders, we used to spend this time of year saying, take your subject tests. Well, you don't have to anymore. Good news for all of you. And in terms of the writing portion of the SAT, ACT, don't need to do that anymore either. Tell you a dirty little secret, you haven't really needed to do it for a few years. For the most part, schools don't look at it, but there are always a few that still insist on having a score. It's gone. Now, this is going to have some ramifications for younger students. To some extent, this is a bit of a freebie, though, for you 11th graders. I'll talk about that more, actually, since I know I'll be getting to the 10th graders in a couple of minutes. That is good news for the 11th grade, which you need because, it's been a tough year, I think, for everybody in their own way. Other issues we are seeing, the gap year stuff, I think, is going to have worked its way through. With one caveat, we are hearing some reports that for athletes who are hoping to be recruited, seeing a little bit of a crunch this year. The NCAA did the right thing, which is not a sentence I say very often, and allowed eligibility rules to extend for athletes who are in college who took this past year off. In many cases because the season was canceled, but so if you wanted to sit out for health reasons. And that means that those athletes are coming back. Honestly, if you're a coach, would you rather have, the next year of a 23-year-old or some 18 or 19-year-old? In most sports, you're looking for the older student. So we are seeing a bit of a crunch on the students who are hoping for the recruitment path. It's not totally closed. Obviously, if you are in the recruitment cycle right now, good. That'll be playing out over the next few months. But there have been challenges anyway. If you're on that path, I don't think I need to tell you it's a little different, going purely off video. But also just sort of seeing some fewer spots. It seems to be the lingering thing about the gap there. And the biggest one, I think, for 11th graders, those of you in 11th grade right now, you all ended your 10th grade with some disruption, but by the time you got to 11th grade, however it was that you were going to school, you at least kind of knew what to expect, and schools were no longer improvising stuff. But you didn't get, in a lot of cases, to go as deeply into your activities as you might have hoped to. 11th grade has traditionally always been the big year for whether it's leadership positions or, it's your year to do your thing, right? It's your year to say, hey, this is, what I did in the school musical. This is what I did, helping with the yearbook, whatever you're on the athletic field. Now, in some cases, sports were able to continue depending on where you live and how outdoors the sports were, of course. But sort of nobody had a normal year. I just mentioned the school musical. Nowhere in the world was it safe to get a bunch of people together in a room and sing. So we know that kind of stuff has been heavily disrupted. And students are not necessarily going to have the same types of resumes that they might have had on the activities list in previous years. And talking about the 10th graders, just highlighting a few things. And again, 10th grade, 9th grade, 8th grade, 7th grade if you're on the call, I'm not sure why, but welcome. As I mentioned, the College Board killed the subject test, killed the SAT essay. It used to be a part of the SAT. College Board is not going out of business. I follow them on LinkedIn, which gives you my age that I say a sentence like that. They're building, they're adding positions, they're investing in themselves. The College Board runs the AP exam. If you are in 10th grade and looking at taking some APs next year, take them seriously, take that exam seriously. I suspect, we all suspect that those AP exams for the AP students are going to carry even more weight than they used to, kind of replacing subject tests. If you're at an IB school that offers APs, take those APs seriously. Now your IBHLs kind of map onto the APs, and I get all that, but you're not going to want to be in a situation where you don't feel comfortable reporting an AP exam score. Now, nice thing for you in 10th grade and beyond, sort of, the 3 R's, the return of the robust resume. You will actually be able to go, volunteer again, volunteer picture there, something you couldn't really do for the past year. And really all of those pictures. So for those of you who still have 11th grade to come, the class of 2022 might be getting a little bit of a bonus from the admissions offices, or at least some understanding about why their resumes don't look the same. You guys won't have as many excuses as you prepare for 11th grade. That is going to be your year to go as deeply as you can. Now let's talk about what we saw work for students and what we expect to continue working for students. So I mentioned earlier the large public universities, and you can put all 50 of them up there, but you get a little crunched. These are oftentimes excellent schools. The mission of a public university is to educate the students of that state. They get taxpayer money from that state. Now, they certainly like to get students from out of state, usually because it means more intuition, but their primary goal is to educate the students of that state. And one thing we have certainly seen during the pandemic is that the in-state schools have become much more popular. And I don't know how quickly that's going to work its way through, how much this is going to be the new normal. And so, as I mentioned earlier, if you were in Florida, UF is probably about the same option as it would have been any other year during this past year. But if you're in Florida and applying to Michigan, which has always been a tough get, even tougher this year, because again, so many students in Michigan were looking to go to their state school. Now, the solution here is not to run to the Ivies. Ivy or bust, Ivy or my state school has never been a viable strategy. But what I want to point out is, as I mentioned earlier, there are those schools, again, I always sort of hate to label rankings on there, but schools that may not have quite the name brand of either your flagship local university or an Ivy or an MIT or something. And I am in no way trying to insult somebody who might be on this call who went to one of these schools. These are all terrific schools. I'm just putting up, again, a few examples. Tulane in New Orleans, DePaul in Chicago, Case Western outside of Cleveland. There are these schools out there that are not seeing the same rush of applicants as the big state schools, as the Ivies. These are schools that are still, I know as you go further down the name recognition, we have schools that are even feeling a bit of a crunch and will they attract enough students? These schools are still having no trouble filling their freshman class, but they're not seeing the spikes in applicants that the other schools are. And these are schools that also offer money. We routinely see six-figure awards over 4 years from these schools. Most years, we see about $9, $10, $11 million in awards going to our students. Those are merit awards, not tied to individual family need. And it's these schools that really offer the value there. So as you were trying to identify schools, and it's not just these 3 schools, trust me, it's a whole family of schools like this that I'm talking about, that I encourage you to look at, that really may offer better financial opportunities than you recognize, while still being, just really exceptional on the academics. Everybody is exceptional. I'd certainly be happy if somebody going to any of these schools that are up there. The activities list, take it seriously. And for those of you who don't know about the activities list yet, on the Common Application, which is the application you will use for most schools you apply to in the United States, you get to list 10 activities that you participated in. Now, as I mentioned earlier, yes, we all understand if your great activity was organizing karaoke contests, it didn't happen during the past year. But you did do something. Most of you found other ways to fill your time. Maybe they were the normal ways, but you found ways to fill your time during the past year. And those of you who are able to figure out how to, I'm not telling you to lie, but how to represent what you did accurately in such a way that shows, and I just got a few things here that we recommend our students do, the depth of your achievement, the time you devoted, as I said, admissions offices are understanding, but the student who's able to show some depth in there is always going to stand out, even as they recognize that some things are going to look different. And the last thing, and I'd say this made a huge difference, I mentioned at the top, right? Academics, extracurriculars, personal qualities. How do they figure out the personal qualities? Well, one big thing are the essays. And that is a plural. Most people are familiar with the college essay, the main personal statement. It's a 650-word thing that you write and goes to pretty much every school you apply to. And I'm not telling you that essay is not important, but it is far from the only important element in your application. And when you get to schools that ask specific questions, and one thing that happened last year is at schools, University of Miami, for example, which I've got up here, one of their questions, or I think it was their only question last year. Schools that never asked questions in the past asked questions this past year because they needed extra information. Now, these questions are kind of famous for inspiring what we think of as beauty pageant language. I'm an engineer, I want to go to Duke. I want to go to Duke because it's a world-class institution with top-notch faculty and students who are passionate about learning, where I'll be able to do my best. It sounds like a beauty pageant, and that kind of thing just does not work. In the same way that somebody tried to pay you a compliment and said, hey, you know what? I think you're awesome. Yep, I just think you're awesome. That's not going to carry as much weight with you as if somebody said, hey, you know what I've noticed? The way that you always do this thing in class where you're able to bring in this other reference, or if you've got some specific example of something they've seen about you, you're going to feel that compliment much more. Same thing here. And it's not just about complimenting the school. They don't need to be complimented. Duke knows how good it is. But what they are looking for is, do you understand the school? Do you have a compelling reason to go to the school? Do you have a compelling reason why you might add or contribute something to the life of the school? And the students who are able to show that really do stand out, especially in an environment where, because of test optional stuff, the academics haven't had quite the same weight as they've had in the past, or in a world where the resume might not have quite the depth that it would have in other years. Those supplemental essays matter so much. As those of you who are currently in 11th grade get to the fall, you're going to need to take those essays seriously. Same thing for those of you who are younger. You've got an extra year or more before you get to them, but they've always mattered. Even as things get back to normal, they're going to continue to matter because nobody achieves these schools just in their academics and extracurriculars. They really do care about the fit stuff. In terms of what we can do to help, always try to run these things so that they aren't quite such a sales shakedown kind of thing. But of course, we are here today to share information with you. We want to see people do better. But if you want more specific information and you're not already a student with us, we do offer free consultations with one of our client managers. You can see our services that we provide, but that's a free service that we provide to people. Just 30 minutes to try and at least get the lay of the land. Beyond that, really encourage you all to understand the timeline that you are facing. For those of you who are not yet in 11th grade, use it as a chance to build yourself. And I say build yourself, not just your resume. Your resume needs to flow organically from who you are. If all your life has been music, and then trying to do a bunch of resume stuff that has nothing to do with music, it's not going to feel authentic. But do look at 11th grade as that chance. It's a cliche that happens to be true, that 11th grade is going to be the most consequential for your college applications. For those of you who are finishing 11th grade now, encourage you to really get to work on that college essay as soon as you can. As soon as you can means once 11th grade is done. I'd still rather you do better on your final exams. But once June 1st hits, or whatever your school calendar is where you live, really encourage you to get that main essay done. The prompts are already available. They basically never change. They tweaked one slightly this year. You can get that essay done. If you have that essay done by the time you get back to 12th grade, I can never promise you that you'll be relaxed, but you will be more relaxed. You will not have that hanging over your head, because you will have other things hanging over your head. Those supplements that I mentioned, you really can't start on those that early. Schools change them. Schools have especially changed their supplemental essay prompts during this crisis because, look, Stanford used to always ask what you did during your summer. Wasn't such a fair question to ask last year, right? Hey, you know what? I stayed home. I couldn't go anywhere. Schools have added prompts, taken them away. You will need to work on those and take those seriously in the fall. Prepare for interviews. Those usually happen after you apply, but take the interviews seriously as well. The more data points you can give them, especially in a world where they don't have as many data points as they like to have normally, the more data points you give them, the better. And the last thing I'll say there are deadlines. Yes, you have to take them seriously. But a deadline for a college application is not the same as a due date in high school. Generally, if you hear something is due November 1st, I went to school, I know you started, October 31st is Halloween, I guess, but you start the day before, right? Honestly, doing this webinar, I knew what this was this evening. I didn't really start, pulling out my PowerPoint to double check it until, the webinar was, fast approaching. College applications, it's a different kind of thing than you've ever done before. You are going to need time to do your best work. You are going to need to build to it. It is very difficult to write a college essay and to write it well. And you're going to want to have time to do it. In addition, there are oftentimes bonuses for applying early. And by that, I don't mean early decision, early action stuff. I literally mean if the application is due January 1st and they are looking at the submit date, and for one student, submitted on December 10th, and the other students submitted on December 31st at 11:59 p.m. You know, school's going to think the December 10th student took things a lot more seriously. So it is something you need to work towards. It's something you need to take seriously, even if it means taking your foot off the gas a little bit in your classes in the fall. I know that's not something parents or teachers like to hear, but colleges can understand if you go down just a tiny bit in grade that semester. They won't even really see it till they made their decisions, but they will certainly see the work you put into your application. Now, spend a lot of time scaring people on these and talking about how, oh my gosh, it was so much harder to get into schools. I've been doing this for several years, and one thing I firmly believe, and I've seen again and again, is that there is a school out there for you. I can never promise you, it would be malpractice if I did, that you can get into University of Pennsylvania, or that you can get into UC Berkeley, or you can get in whatever school you want to name, Dartmouth. But the United States has, just talking about the US here, not even, let alone Canada, the UK, and elsewhere. The United States has thousands of universities. We personally recommend about 250 to 300 of those universities in any given year. There's a ton of amazing schools in the US. And of course, I have seen students in my life who are disappointed with their results, but I've never seen a student who says, oh, there's nowhere I can go. And with that attitude, remember, adults want you to succeed. As parents, we want you to succeed, but even not our own children, you are the ones who are going to be running, the world one day. You're going to be running for political office, running the Fortune 500 companies, doing the important research, winning the Oscars, and we want to give you that leg up. And you do have those opportunities ahead of you, and we're here to help. And with that said, I mentioned earlier that the most fun part of these is usually the Q&A. So do want to encourage people, if you have questions, to go ahead and put those in, and certainly hang out here for a minute or two. There's sort of always a question here, about early versus regular. There are a million different flavors to application deadlines, a million different flavors to everything in this area. It's a strategy that really varies from school to school. Generally speaking, you want to be able to put your best foot forward when you hit apply. So if you're waiting for a slightly better test score, there's not going to be an advantage to applying early when you might have that better test score and apply regular. Conversely, early can be a great way to sort of show your interest in a school. Not so active on the questions. Well, I hope that the information here was useful to people today. Again, we are still, some of that data is still coming in. Some students are still reporting their results, their rewards, what have you. It was a crazy year, but it does look like, again, things are normalizing, getting new news every day. And I want to wish all of you the best, whatever your college goals are. And again, if you are a student, thank you for being here, and please take advantages of the resources that you have. If you're not a student and you want to learn more, again, that QR code will take you to the free consultation. Also, the follow-up email will have a link to that as well. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful evening, afternoon, wherever you live, and wish you all the best. Thank you so much.